Hi everyone, so in this video, which is the second part of our two-part series on the eye, we're really going to be focusing on how the eye works. In our last video, we were talking about light and key properties of light, and in this one, we're going to be talking about specifically how the eye is able to sense light. So let's get started. Now, of the key ability of the eye, there's pretty much two key functions. And first and foremost is the ability to differentiate multiple colors. So your eyes can actually differentiate approximately 2,000 different colors. Now, of the 2,000 different colors that it can differentiate, this is part of the visible spectrum. Now, again, the visible spectrum is the small part of the electromagnetic spectrum, which is all of the different types of energy waves that are produced. The visible spectrum is the small sliver of electromagnetic waves that your eyes can process. So the longest wavelength that your eye can process, which is on one end of our visible spectrum, is the color red. And the shortest wavelength that your eye can process, which is on the other side, is violet. So of all the colors that your eye can differentiate, it is between red and violet. And the part of the eye that is able to do this is the retina, but it's a specific type of cells in the retina called your cone cells. And your cone cells sense color. Now you have three types of cone cells, and you have cone cells that sense blue, green, and red. So it's basically the stimulation of all one, two, or all three of these cone cells that actually produce all of the multiple colors that you can see. The second key ability of the eyes is to adapt to brightness and dimness. And your eye actually does this in two ways. The first way is to manipulate the size of the pupil. Now, the pupil is not an actual structure of the eye, but rather a gap or a hole where light enters. And the muscle that controls the size of the pupil is the iris. So when it is dark outside, your iris causes your pupil to get bigger, so more light comes in and to hit the retina. And when it's bright outside, your iris causes the pupil to get smaller to allow less light to hit the retina. So that's the first way. The second way is you have specialized cells in your retina that adapt to brightness and that detect brightness and dimness, and these are called your rod cells. They don't sense color; those are your cone cells, but your rod cells sense brightness. Okay, so now we're going to look at the parts of the eye. Okay, so first and foremost, the key part of the eye, so we have the front part. So all of this would be the part that would be outside of the body, which you can see. So our cornea is this part right here. It's a transparent window type structure, and it acts as a protection of your pupil and your iris and your lens. So in between our cornea, which is right here, and the iris, which is right here, you would actually have aqueous humor. So you would have a transparent liquid that would actually give the outside of the cornea, the outside of the eye, a little bit of a rounded shape, and also cause to hydrate the lens. So then we have, again, our pupil. And the key thing about our pupil is not a structure in the eye, but pretty much a gap, so a lack of structure, to allow for light to go through. Then we have, and the structure that basically causes the change of size of the pupil is our iris, which is smooth muscle. Then we have our lens. Now our lens is transparent spherical type shape, which allows for your focusing of your image to hit on the back, which is your retina. Now there's one part of the retina that does not process any images, which is your blind spot, which is right here. And the reason why is because that's the spot where the retina is attached to the optic nerve. So you don't have any photoreceptors right at the spot. Now, inside the eye, so in between the lens and the retina, it's actually filled with a transparent jelly-like liquid called the vitreous humor. It gives it shape and structure to the inside of the eye. Then if we're looking at our different layers outside So again, we would have muscles. So these are muscles that cause the movement of the eye, so up, down, left, right, and diagonally. We have our sclera, which is the white of the eye, so it gives it a very hard, tough structure, protects the eye. And then in between, we have the choroid, where we would have lots of blood vessels, because again, just like any body part of your body, you need a steady supply of oxygen, nutrients, and be able to remove waste products. Okay, so what we have right here is a diagram of the eye. So the first part, we have our cornea, our transparent covering over our pupil. Then we have our lens, and our lens's key function is to focus images. Now the lens actually changes shape depending on what you are looking at. If you're looking at images close or if you're looking at images far, it changes shape to adapt to these things. So if you're looking at a far image, the lens actually flattens out, and if you're looking at a close image, it actually bulges out. So you have muscles, so ciliary muscles, so these right over, right over here, which help cause the lens to change shape, depending on whether you're looking close or whether you're looking far. Then we have our pupil, which is right here, which is the gap where light enters. We have the iris. So our iris is right here, controls the size of the pupil. And then in between the cornea and the iris pupil segment is our aqueous humor, which is our transparent liquid. Then if we look at the back of the eye, we have the sclera, so our whites of the eye as a form of protection and shape. We have the choroid, where we have our blood vessels. Then we have our retina, and the key thing about our retina is that it is the sensory receptor. And again, if we think back to our 3 types of nerve tissue, we have sensory receptors, we have sensory nerves, and we have motor nerves. Our sensory receptors are the ones that take the stimulus and turn it into a nerve impulse. The sensory nerve, and in this case is the optic nerve, so the optic nerve is a sensory nerve, it transmits the impulse, which was generated from the retina, and it sends it to the brain. Then again, the blind spot is right here. It's the one spot where the retina is attached to the optic nerve and you don't have any photoreceptors there. So it's the one spot of your retina that you're like blind. You can't process any information there. And then you have your vitreous humor, which is basically filling in the eye, so it's not hollow. So it keeps its shape, and it's a transparent jelly-like consistency. So it kind of feels like Jello before it's been set. All right, and last but not least, how we get from light to image. So first thing is that the light wave has to pass through the pupil. And the reason why it has to pass through the pupil, because again, our pupil is our gap. Now, the structure that the light has to go through after going through the pupil is it has to hit the lens. And the whole purpose of the lens is to focus the image. So if you're looking at something that's far away, the lens is going to flatten. And if you're looking at something close by, the lens is going to bulge. Once the light wave goes through the lens, that is going to be hitting the sensory receptors on the retina. So the key thing is that it goes to the retina. Now, once the information hits the retina, there's 2 cells that gets activated. So the first is our rod cells that is going to be determining the brightness and consequently the dimness of your image. And then would be the cone cells, which would be figuring out the color. Now, one thing that's really important to note is that if it is too dim, your cone cells don't get activated and it's only your rod cells. So that's why when you're walking around with very, very little light during the dark, it's very hard for you to actually distinguish color. You can only really see in monochromatic scale because your cone cells are not activated, just your rod cells. Okay, so once the light wave hits the sensory receptor, then you have your translation of that information. So we have to translate the stimuli, which is our light, into a nerve impulse. Once it's been translated, that nerve impulse has to get to the brain, and it travels the brain via a sensory nerve. And in this case, the sensory nerve that it is traveling along is the optic nerve, which is our sensory nerve. And that concludes our mini video on the eye. Thanks for watching.